Howdy y'all, and welcome back to Country Fried Minis. I'm your host Cameron, the country boy in the big city, presenting to you once again from my temporary studio location on account of these yet ongoing repairs to my apartment. And today I've come before you to talk about getting models done in a hurry. Returning viewers of the channel will note that I attend a regular Battletech meetup once a month at Games of Berkeley here in the Bay Area. Unfortunately, this meeting has had a slight pivot to the composition of our forces, and I've needed to paint up an additional 1,000 battle values worth of models for my small force. So to accomplish this, I've decided to add some infantry and some artillery and a vehicle to the list. So today I'm going to talk about using third-party models and using some contrast paint to slap some colors on them and get them done real quick like. Since I've elected to add some filler units to my list, I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and talk about some of the fabulous models that are out there and available through third-party retailers. This first unit that I'm putting together is using the CP Model 6mm range Regional Defense Force Power Armor. This is particularly fitting because I'm going to go ahead and use this unit as inner sphere battle armor. Next up on the plate here, I'm going to go ahead and use this TOS-1 Buratino MLRS platform to make an Srm Carrier. This model is manufactured by GHQ, who makes some unparalleled 1/285th scale micro armor options. Although they don't provide futuristic options, the modern military units can work fine in a pinch for certain tanks within the game. And continuing with this manufacturer, I just happen to have one M1 8-inch howitzer left over, which I'll use to go ahead and convert a field gun infantry platoon with an artillery piece. Now this model has some little fiddly bits, so I'm going to go ahead and get out my snippers and cut off these here recoil absorbers for the sides of the cannon. It's important to be super gentle here because these parts are very fiddly and extremely small. They'd break real easy if you're not careful. Now, continuing with this infantry project, I do have to knock GHQ a few points. Their infantry models are a little more realistically proportioned, so don't read too great on the tabletop. Instead, I'm going to opt for these Brigade Models astronauts because I really like the look of them. They're a little more exaggerated, almost a heroic scale, but that's going to make them read real easy on the tabletop as individual infantry. Moving forward with the project, we're going to go ahead and get out our X-Acto blade and start cleaning up the flash on these models. Since these bits are so small and fiddly, it's just going to take some precision application of pressure using our X-Acto blade to trim off all the excess metal. We just need to remember to take our time and apply some precision cuts with this tool. It would be real easy to lose important details at this step, so it really pays to take our time and really focus while cutting these bits off. Now that those parts are all cleaned up, we're going to want to glue them together. Since we're dealing with such tiny parts, it really pays to set out a receptacle and pour some super glue onto it rather than trying to apply it directly to the model from the nozzle of the bottle. Today's guest glue palette is Caterpie. Now, once we've got some glue set aside, we're going to go ahead and scrutinize these parts and ensure we know exactly what bit is going where. Since these little parts are so tiny, it will be real easy to get them in the wrong spot or overlook some small connection point. In the case of the struts on the side of this 8-inch howitzer, I probably spent 10 minutes looking them over and trying to figure out the correct orientation and mounting point. That said, once you're done looking over these parts and you're absolutely sure you know where the bits attach, go ahead and use a toothpick or an old paintbrush that you're going to throw away to apply a tiny bit of super glue on the connection points for the bits. As you can see, a nice pair of sharp tweezers can really assist in this task, as we're dealing with some really tiny bits. Furthermore, the parts we're dealing with are so tiny, we can even get away without using any accelerator. Just a drop of super glue in the correct location and a few seconds of cure time, and that should hold these tiny pieces in place. Of course, some of these 6mm models are real obvious as to where the parts go, like as is the case with this TOS-1 Buratino. It's real obvious where the turret connects to the hull, and then it's further obvious where the MLRS system connects to the turret. It'd be real hard to screw this up, though not impossible, so make sure you pay attention to what you're doing. That said, it's pretty foolproof, and if you take your time and really think about what you're doing and give it a good look before you glue the parts down, you can get them done in no time, and they're going to look great on the tabletop. And with the final note as to the assembly, it's good to know that the infantry aren't going to need any real assembly. We're just going to take our sharp X-Acto blade and trim off all the flash before getting ready to put them on their base after we prep them up. Furthermore, the packs of infantry models come with more than you need, so we're really going to make out like a bandit here and have some left over for future projects, since we're dealing with hex bases and you can only fit so many on each one. In the case of the battle armor, we're only going to use 3, even though it represents a squad of 4, so as to not crowd the base. And as far as the astronauts go, we're only going to use 2, since the howitzer itself is going to take so much space on that base. At the end of the day, we'll have plenty left over for those future projects or future additions to our lances when we need to fill out 100 points here or there. Following the cleanup of the models, we're going to turn our attention to that ubiquitous step of cleaning up the bases. Since these here proxy model hex bases always come on a sprue, they tend to leave a connection point on the side of one of them, and are going to require a little bit of cleanup with an X-Acto blade. Cleaning these bases is no problem at all, as it's just going to require a quick swipe with our X-Acto blade to cut down the little bit of leftover plastic and get the base rim ready and cleaned up. And once they're cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and use the same method that I showcased in my Building a Battletech Lance Part 1 video and sculpt some texture onto the bases. As outlined in the aforementioned video, I like to set up the texture on these bases using green stuff. Green stuff, also known as Kneadatite, is a really awesome tool for this job. It's super soft and can take all kinds of details, and it doesn't shrink as it cures. This amazing hobby implement is available from many sellers, but I recommend this giant pack by Gale Force 9. This manufacturer has really done a solid for the hobbyists out there and provides an amazing value for your money. By buying this amazing value pack, you end up with about 4 or 5 times as much as GW will sell you for about half the price. And one final technical note on this here texturizing project, I'm going to go ahead and use a 50-50 mix of the yellow and blue portions. I want my putty to be soft enough to move around, but also firm enough to hold the shapes once I put it into it. Now that putty work has had plenty of time to dry, we're going to go ahead and go back to the standard procedure of priming these models before we get started. In this case, I've elected to use my Stynylrez white primer through the airbrush so that I can spray these 3 bases inside the privacy of my own home. Personally, since I live downtown San Francisco, I don't really have a great location to go outside and spray my models with a rattle can. That being said, a rattle can works just fine, and you can use any kind of white primer that you like for this. I personally recommend the Rust-Oleum flat finish made for plastics. It's really good, it gets the job done, and it's dirt cheap. You won't catch me shelling out $20 for a single rattle can from Games Workshop. But you will catch me shelling out $10 for this here bottle of Citidel Contrast Medium. This stuff is magic, and that's what we're going to be using today throughout the majority of this here project. We're going to take a little bit of our paint in any color we want to use and put a whole bunch of contrast medium on it to create a real thick wash of a contrast style. Just add a bit of your paint to the palette and add a whole bunch of this here contrast medium and mix it up and keep testing it until you got a nice translucent layer. We're trying to get these models done as fast as is feasibly possible and hopefully get it done in a single coat. At the time of recording this here video, I needed to finish these models for an event the very next day, so they had to be done, and they had to be done quick. Now, that said, since I'm painting Davion Heavy Guards here, which have a very specific royal paint scheme, I need to be extremely careful in the application of this paint. Though this here red is going to apply it real smooth and quick, it will inevitably stain any portion that you get it on, so it's real important to only apply it exactly where you want it. Though I'm working super fast here, I'm also trying to maintain as much precision as possible and only put the paint exactly where I want it. Once you spill this color over onto portions that are supposed to be white, you can't fix it without repainting that entire spot. Even though we're going to take a little extra care in this step, it's still going to go super fast as long as we're careful and apply this paint where we want it. And since I've made this red so thin, I'm going to go ahead and apply it in 2 coats and make sure it's got a nice saturation on all the portions that are supposed to be red. And from here I'm going to pivot to a proper GW product once again and use this Apothecary White Contrast Paint by Citidel. As some of you may know out there, I'm not the first one to plug GW products, but in this case I really do recommend this here Apothecary White Contrast Paint. Sure, you can mix up some gray with the contrast medium and get the same result, but it's really nice to have a consistent pot that's going to make your white tones quick and easy and done without too much highlighting or worrying about the end result. So for that, I really do recommend this paint. Maybe you should hop down to your friendly local gaming store and give them a little business and pick up a bottle of this for your own collection. It'll definitely be worth the investment. With that shameless plug out of the way, we're going to get back to mixing up our own colors using paint and the contrast medium. In my case, I've achieved the blue of the Davion Heavy Guards with this here Calidor Sky, which is a Citidel color, but any acrylic paint is going to work and mix up fine with the contrast medium. So once again, after mixing this down to a nice thin translucent layer, we're going to go ahead and add it to the outer edges and finish up this here triad of colors. Now, pivoting to the next part, I want to paint up these infantry in a nice regular Davion color. It's almost a standard olive drab color, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of this here Warboss green and a drop or 2 of the Mornfang brown and mix it up the same way as all the others using the contrast medium. If you haven't noticed a theme so far, we're really pushing this here contrast medium as a quick and easy way to get your infantry and tanks painted up and get them on the battlefield as fast as possible. Today we're not looking to do a bunch of details or fine work, we just want to get these models done and on the tabletop and in a reasonable color scheme to match the models we've already completed. By no means are contrast paints a magic wand that'll get your work done, but they can indeed cut the time to a fraction of what it would normally take. I feel like that effect is especially evident on these here basic linemen and this artillery cannon. Since the base color for their uniforms as well as the cannon itself is all just a single color, it gets done in mere seconds and is ready for the next layer. Since we've made this contrast paint so thin, it's no problem just to slap it all over every surface of them and let it do all the heavy lifting for the shading as well as the highlights. It's thin enough to seep down into the recesses on all the surfaces here, while also pigmented enough to leave a little bit of tint on the raised portions of the model. Now, reinforcing the idea that these contrast paints aren't a magic wand that's going to do all the work, we're going to take some black paint and go ahead and black in the areas that are going to get any kind of metallics or are going to be black. Since these are tiny 1/285th scale models, we're going to select a real small brush and be very careful about where we place the paint. That same concept of precision is also going to apply to this next step of Mornfang brown, which we're going to apply to the olive drab as a bit of a camouflage tone on them. We're going to apply this real sparingly and with purpose to kind of break up that monotone that's going on right now. And next up, we're going to switch over to this Army Painter War Paints gunmetal and start dry brushing up the metallic portions on these models. Just like as is the case with the previous 2 colors, we're going to use a small brush here and apply this real diligently and with great precision. We're taking our time and applying these colors with accuracy so we don't have to go back and clean up any mistakes. At this point, spillover would be detrimental to any work we've done so far, so we'll take a little time and add it to the diligence and we'll save overall time at the end. It's a little counterintuitive here, but in a roundabout way, by working a little slower here, we make a faster overall time at the end. Kind of like car racing. That slow replay is actually making great time around them tight corners. Now, For this next step, we're going to apply the Wild Rider Red directly to the bases without worrying about thinning it down with the contrast paint. This here step is intended as a base coat rather than a tinting of an underlying color. So we're going to just apply it full strength and coat every square inch of the bases that is the red rocks. The only spots we got to worry about hitting are the models themselves and any of the areas we have deemed to be grass. And speaking of that grass, we're going to switch back over to this here Citidel color Warp Lightning contrast paint. I'm not recommending this one necessarily, but it's a color that I really like to use to create a grass effect on my models. And now, continuing with the detail on the base, we're going to go and switch over to this here Fire Dragon Bright and stipple it on in little jabby motions all over the base. We're not even worried about unloading the brush as you normally would with a stippling. We just want to jab this color all over the raised areas of the rocks to create a rough highlight, which we'll go ahead and tamp down later with an ink wash. In that case, the preferred ink wash here is Agrax Earthshade, which we're going to apply all over these bases at full strength. Now, with that ink wash out of the way, we're going to go ahead and actually do some detail work on these models. We're going to hit these visors here with a little bit of this Warboss green in the lower left corner. These individual infantry models are so small that being super accurate with the placement of this color isn't all that important. Even when I switch over to this here moot green to add a second layer in a smaller corner, it's not going to matter all that much if we're super accurate here, just that it's there and it can be read at arm's length. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to switch over to some Vallejo model color black paint and go ahead and paint up the base rims on these here models. I always love this part when working on models. It really feels like you've hit that home stretch and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and that the project's almost completely done. I do say almost in this case because I'm going to put one final detail using a blend of this here Baylor Brown and Ushtabi Bone. I've taken to this trend of naming the pilots in my mechs and in my infantry squadrons and then adding little banners to the front of the base. It's pretty easy to do, and we're just going to put a generic banner shape down with this here Baylor Brown and add little bits of Ushtabi Bone to the edges as we bring it in and make it look a little bit three-dimensional. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to read as a banner and give us enough space to go ahead and write on the name with some thin down black paint. After just a few layers, it starts to look pretty nice and reads well enough as a banner that we can call it good enough and move on to a little bit more of this black paint thinned down with a drop or two of the contrast medium. In this case, we don't want it super thin, but we do want it to flow real smooth off the tiniest, sharpest brush that we have, with which we'll take our time and trace out the name on this here banner. In my case, the labeling convention is the first initial followed by the last name. It's completely arbitrary and a whole bunch of extra work on these models, but it is super nice if you're playing any kind of narrative campaign. Who knows, maybe one of your better pilots ejects in the heat of combat and your opponent captures them and you can have a lot of fun with that whole narrative. Maybe even some kind of political favor or a great C-bill payout. In the end, it's Battletech and you got the freedom to play it however you want to. And with that, these models are done and ready to match up with the rest of my forces. Although the paint job is real quick and dirty, it really goes to show you that with a little contrast paint and a little panic, you can get these models done and paint them up to a decent standard, at least one that matches your forces. I had a lot of fun painting these models up. It's a little bit out of the norm for me because I'm not putting any detail layers to them, not doing any sponge chipping or edge highlighting, and they still look alright to me. I really recommend picking up a bottle of this here contrast medium so that you can achieve similar results no matter what paints you have. And with that, I want to thank y'all for joining me here today at Country Fried Minis. I'm having a blast putting these videos together, and although it's a ton of work, it still seems like something real fun to do and is contributing a lot to my hobby experience. Furthermore, I play this game of Battletech up at Games of Berkeley once a month. It's every third Sunday, so if you want to come out and check it out and meet me and the guys and roll some dice, feel free to come on down. Finally, I want to come back again with that good old adage and remind y'all to be happy while you're painting. Take it easy, fellers. See you next time.
6, 7, 8, 9. So that's walk down, walk down. We'll dump everything in the fire starter.
Oh yeah?
Everything in the fire starter.
That's beautiful. We're looking for, what's your range on the large pulse lasers?
Where? 11. Is that 11 arm? You can blow up on my arm. Left arm, yeah.
That was actually the slow, especially when